You're listening to Refracted World with Terry Geo. Episode 18, Love is Love, Legally. Today is the 29th of March 2024, which is exactly 10 years since same-sex marriage was legalised here in England and in Wales. Scotland was a little slower, passing the law in December 2014, and Northern Ireland was a lot slower, only passing the law in 2020. Just 4 years ago. But that does mean that same-sex marriage is now legal in the whole of the United Kingdom, which is awesome to say. Before I go on, I need to apologise. I pulled last week's episode because I was ill and I couldn't promote it, and that episode will now be pushed back to, I'm hoping, next week, because I wanted to focus this week on the anniversary of same-sex marriage. And yeah, I've had a really horrible week. I've had one of the worst head colds, if not the worst head cold I've ever had. And over a week later, I'm still blocked up, as you can probably hear. And I think I have infected sinuses because they're very painful and everything tastes sour. So I'll be seeing my doctor tomorrow. But yeah, I had to pull the episode last week, and I'm really sorry that I had to, because I've had some people come back and were disappointed that there wasn't a full episode. So I apologise to all my faithful listeners. You are very much loved and appreciated. And that's why, even though I'm not at full health, I'm recording this episode now because I don't want to miss anything else. I'll also be recording 2 other episodes, hopefully this week, just to get me back ahead, because I don't ever want to get into the position where I have to miss a week again. And anyway, back to the episode. So it's been 10 years since same-sex marriage has been legalised in England. And some people I've spoken to are shocked that it's only been 10 years. In fact, some people I spoke to 2 years ago were shocked it had only been 8 years. So why did it take so long? I have touched on this subject in previous podcasts. Homosexuals didn't even have legal status here in the UK until 1968. And even after that, they were still treated as outcasts and had to hide in the shadows. And for some people, they still do. Then, of course, the HIV epidemic started in the 1980s, and, of course, Section 28 started in the 80s, which banned discussing anything gay-related in schools, and that lasted until 2003. So really, the LGBT community only started to be fully accepted 21 years ago. As a quick aside, I'm saying LGB as now the TQIA+ community are fighting for their rights, and their communities are being targeted and bullied just like mine was. They need our support the same as all human beings who are fighting for their rights need our support. But why was there a sudden change for the LGB community in the early noughties? I believe we can thank the internet for that. By bringing all of us together from all over the world, we can discuss, we can talk, we can share our personal stories in a way that just simply wasn't possible before. It has been a world-changing tool for human rights. It has also been the reason for a lot of pain and suffering and torment and even death. But please listen to next week's episode for a more detailed analysis on our modern online lives. Before the internet, people would march and they would rally and they would protest, and I know this because I was one of those people. I would march through the streets of London or Manchester or Leeds. I would be on floats. I would be handing out flyers, and I would be seen, but only by those who wanted to see us. Parades are great, but they don't last long and can be far too easily dismissed and ridiculed and made fun of. Oh, they're just partying. Oh, they're trying to shove being gay down our throats. Oh, look at them with the feather boas and the drag queens and the performances. It's all an act. Why do they need pride events? I'm sure we've all heard that said before in the past, or maybe even currently. So I will do my very best later in this episode to explain why pride events and parades and marches are very much needed, even today. In the late 90s, I was the editor of a gay lifestyle magazine where my voice could be heard, or read, I should say, by thousands. But the majority of those readers were already a part of the LGBT+ community. So the messages we were trying to get out there to the wider public were not being dispersed to the wider public, only to our own community. But the internet was slowly growing in the background. People were starting to find message boards, using emails for the first time, and the beginnings of social media. By 2003, most people were online, and once Section 28 was abolished that same year, teachers could finally discuss the LGBT plus community to the kids, meaning that fewer people grew up being homophobic. Gay, lesbian, and bisexual people were seen on TV, drag queens hosted game shows, and queer people were no longer depicted as deviants in the mainstream media. Well, at least for the most part. We do still have the remnants of this in both media and the general public, but as time moves on and older generations pass away, the stigma and the hate we have endured for centuries is slowly dissolving, thankfully. And I say centuries and not millennia because 2,000 years ago, being gay wasn't a crime. You can, in the most part, thank Christianity for that, and later the British Empire for criminalising it around the globe. But we'll leave that for a possible future episode, as that is a huge story all of its own. In the noughties, I was fortunate enough to have a platform where my voice could be heard by millions. I was often on TV or radio, giving interviews, talks in schools and town halls, speaking to MPs. It was still a tough time to be gay, but I, along with thousands of others like me online and in the media, kept pushing forward for equality. And the more people we reached, the more knowledge we could pass on, and the more educated about LGBT plus lives people were. And all that news and press and information we were dispersing across the nation brought us to our date 10 years ago, when the first same-sex marriages were performed here in England and in Wales. But the UK was not the first to legalise same-sex marriage, not by a long shot. That honour, unsurprisingly, goes to the Netherlands, who started the worldwide legalisation of same-sex marriage in 2001. 2 years later, Belgium and Canada followed, with the US state of Massachusetts next in 2004, and fifth was Spain in 2005. The whole United States didn't legalise same-sex marriage until 2015, the year after England and Wales. In 2006, South Africa became the sixth country to legalise same-sex marriage, and remains the only country in Africa to legalise it. In fact, we've seen the opposite happening, with many African nations making life tougher, and in some cases, impossible for the LGBTQIA+ community. In total, around the world, 37 countries have changed their laws to allow same-sex marriage, and all the rights and privileges that go with it. Now, 37 countries in 23 years is undeniably a great achievement. That is, until you realise there are 195 countries in the world. 65 countries criminalise consensual same-sex activity, 41 criminalise consensual activities between women, 14 criminalise trans people or cross-dressing, and 12 countries have the death penalty, which for many includes months of torture before their execution. Many of these countries are in the Commonwealth or former British colonies. So when someone says, "Why do we need pride events?" or "Why isn't there a straight pride?" this is why. I have asked this question hundreds of times. But if you were growing up in a country, especially one of the 12 that kill you if you're gay, would you choose to be gay? Of course not. And yet there are millions of gay people living in fear in those countries right now. No one gets to choose their sexuality, the same as we don't get to choose our eye colour or our skin colour. Sexuality is a part of us, and we can't change it. I don't understand why this doesn't get through to people. The play I wrote and performed last year and the year before was called Blink, and the storyline is based around this. It's a love story, basically, between a white Englishman and a black Kenyan man. And I wrote it because I have a lot of gay friends. Obviously, I also have a lot of gay friends from Africa. And people don't think about that over here. If you're in a country where same-sex marriage is legalised and we have all the rights and privileges, blah, 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 we don't tend to think about the countless other countries that don't. And we don't tend to think about the countries that imprison those for a lifetime or murder them or torture them. We just don't think about it. And it's not like these countries put out the statistics or, blurt out on the media what they're doing. For many of them, they don't. And so it doesn't get reported on, it doesn't get talked about. And I needed to get that across to people that it does happen, it's happening right now, and no one is helping them. The world isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Human rights are not universal, and equality is a distant dream for many of us. Everyone who is born has the right to live their lives the same as everybody else. But propaganda, misinformation, lies, bad education, religion are the constant blocks millions are forced up against all over the globe. But with access to the internet, these walls are starting to crumble, which is why in some countries the internet is restricted or blocks certain sites from public view. I was in Turkey in 2011, and on the first day I logged into my Gay Romeo account. The following day, the site was no longer there. By searching online, I discovered that the word gay was included on a list of words which the government had censored, accusing many LGBT plus sites as being obscene or causing child abuse. Gay Romeo is a male dating site. Unfortunately, things in Turkey have only gotten worse in the coming years, since the president clamped down on the LGBT plus groups, labelling them as perverse. And Turkey is not even in the 12 worst countries in the world, but life there is getting increasingly more difficult for the people just to be themselves. I have been an activist since I first came out as gay at 16. I have never hidden who I am, and I believe the more I talk about it, the more people will understand and reduce the amount of prejudice and stigma there is in the world. But I can only do so because I was born in the UK. Yes, some parts of my life have been incredibly difficult. I have had my fair share of bullying, torment, and rejection, but I can't even equate that to how much harder it would have been if I'd have been born in a country like Somalia. The aid worker I spoke to after writing Blink had worked in Somalia, which is why I actually added that to the script. I never imagined that gay people were being tortured as well as being executed. Being executed is bad enough. Sometimes they're publicly executed with crowds cheering for their death because being gay is painted so negatively in these countries. But if you just exchange being gay for having blue eyes, there is a 1% chance of a child of two brown-eyed parents giving birth to someone with blue eyes. Imagine that was punishable by torture and death. If you were born with blue eyes, you would have to live in the shadows, always hide your face, never be able to trust anyone, never know kindness, never know love, and always hide who you were for fear of being captured, tortured, and killed. That is exactly what it's like to be gay in those countries. But if I could just paraphrase Star Wars a moment, the more they tighten their grip, the more countries will slip through. There is light ahead. This year, Greece became the 37th country to legalise same-sex marriage, and this is important, as Greece is the first Orthodox country to do so. Asia, which is known for its outdated anti-gay laws, thanks Britain, is slowly making progress. Taiwan made history by becoming the first Asian nation to legalise same-sex marriage in 2019, followed by India in 2022 and Nepal in 2023. Thailand have approved a draft for same-sex marriage, which is expected to be debated this year. Also expected this year is support from Japan and the Philippines. And just to mention Singapore, although they don't recognise same-sex marriage, they did change the law to recognise same-sex unions in 2022. And that's a big one for me personally, as my husband is from Singapore, so we of course keep a close eye on the developments there. I just really hope they hurry up and recognise same-sex marriage, because I always feel like a second-class citizen whenever we go over there, because we are married, we live together, we've been together for 9 years, and yet as soon as we land in Singapore, we are no longer married in the eyes of the Singaporean laws. And I hate that. I shouldn't have to go through that. No one should. When we're planning a trip abroad, we look at what countries allow same-sex unions or aren't homophobic. There are many countries that we will never be able to go to until they change their laws. I am a huge lover of ancient Egypt. I would love to go to Egypt. My previous episode was all about the pyramids in Egypt, and yet I can't go because they have staunch anti-LGBT plus laws. And even if we were safe, even if we stuck to our Nile cruise or a hotel and people say, no, honestly, it's fine, I don't want to support a country that doesn't support me as a human being. And so I may never visit the pyramids. I may never go and see Hatshepsut's temple. I may never see Karnak. And that's a tragedy because I've been obsessed since I was a child. And there's so many places in the world that I will never be able to set foot in for this reason, just because I was born gay. Do you know how many gay people there are in the world? If you look at the percentages and add them all up from around the world, gay people make up between 2 and 5%. That's it. We really are a minority. And this is why for centuries we were outcasts. We were different from the general population and therefore we didn't matter. We were so few in number with so few places to congregate and therefore we couldn't come together in an uprising to demand equal rights because we didn't know who else was gay because no one was being forthcoming with that information. Otherwise they get thrown into prison or worse. But with the invention of the telephone and then radio and then television and now internet, we have been able to find others like us. We have been able to join forces and march in protests, form charities, and introduce ourselves to the world as human beings and not the monsters we have been depicted as for hundreds of years. I believe this is why the trans, non-binary and drag communities have now been targeted so hard. They look at us, this once marginalised community of gay, bisexual and lesbians, and they see us getting rights and getting privileges and being allowed to marry, and they're thinking, I want some of that. Maybe it's our time as well. And so they have been finding their brothers and sisters and doing everything we did decades ago. But because they were the unseen, the rhetoric now is that they are a new phenomenon, which is spreading online and infecting young minds to join their twisted cause. None of this is based in reality, of course. It's all lies and misinformation spread by the right wing to pollute the minds of the educationally challenged. Fear is a strong motivator. And as I talked about in my conspiracy theory episode, for those of you who subscribe to Refracted World Plus, it is far too easy for people to believe a well-constructed lie than believe the truth. I have talked about trans people in my episode on gender, but simply, trans people have been around since antiquity. It's not new. It's not a fad. It's just that now the internet is able to give us the view into everyone's lives for the first time. But instead of sitting back, listening, and opening their minds to the possibility of different human beings living with us, some have decided that only their way of life is the correct way to live. Thankfully, we now have the truth on our side and can deliver it through things like Google. People just need to realise that the internet is so much more than just social media. From a very personal perspective, I grew up in a very homophobic household, in a very homophobic city where I was bullied every single day. Section 28 prevented me from learning about my community in any way, and the internet was 2 decades away. The age of consent was 18, and gay marriage wasn't even a pipe dream. I didn't know if I would find sustainable love, let alone settle down with somebody for the rest of my life. And yet, I did. In 2018, I married the most wonderful person I've ever met. We had the wedding of our dreams, and it was the happiest day of our lives. We chose the perfect venue in central London. All of our friends and family attended, with Ken's family flying in from Singapore and visiting the UK for the very first time. As English and Singaporean weddings are quite different, we combined the two traditions to make something that was unique for us. There were videos played, the wait staff delivered the food while Be Our Guest from Beauty and the Beast played. We had audience participating in games, and the speeches were delivered in between each course. Ken and I decided not to drink alcohol throughout the day, and only opened the champagne for ourselves when the evening dew started. This way, we were able to really enjoy every aspect. Now, everyone else was allowed to drink. It was just us that decided to not drink throughout the day. When we got to bed at 3 a.m., I lay there, staring up at the ceiling until 9 the next morning. I replayed everything that happened that day, and it was as if I was recording it in real time to my memory banks. It's never happened to me before, it's never happened to me since, but it was such an incredible day, I didn't want to lose anything. I managed to get 1 hour's sleep before getting up and then meeting Ken's brothers, and then we started packing for the honeymoon the next day. Every time I think back to that whole experience, I can't help but smile and feel filled with love. That was 6 years ago, just 4 years after the law was changed here in England. Why did it take so long? Why was it ever imposed in the first place? I mean, that's actually easy to answer. It was religion, obviously. But every human being wants to love and to be loved, or at least the ability for both. Many of us want to sanctify that love with a legally binding document and a kick-ass day to celebrate and share that love with the people close to them in their lives. This should be a very basic right for every human being, and yet for the majority of our world, it isn't. One person's beliefs should not in any way determine how someone else lives their life. Belief isn't based on fact. It is simply a belief. But my life is factual. I am real, and I deserve the same rights and privileges as every other person. Someone's right to be in a loving relationship should not be a discussion for anyone other than those in that relationship, be it for one night or 100 years together. Love is love, and no one should ever stand in the way of that. I am really happy that there are now 37 countries who recognise same-sex marriages. But there are still 160 countries in the world, many of whom imprison or kill members of the LGBTQIA+ community simply for being born that way. And others who see the world being more inclusive are now clamping down with harsher laws, like what we're currently seeing happening in Ghana. Together, as human beings, we can do amazing things, and only together can we bring about global equality. We should never become complacent. Just because you have something doesn't mean that everybody does. This episode has focused mainly on same-sex marriage because of the anniversary, but equality is needed for all of us. Every single person who is born is equal to everybody else. They are a human being and deserve the same shot at life as everybody else. And until we have that, the world will never be equal. I looked online to find a website I could direct you all to now, but every one I've found, in admittedly my very brief search, was focused on one area of equality each. So one was about the distribution of wealth, another one was women's rights, another one was gay rights, etc. I would love to find a site that focuses on equality for everybody in the world. Maybe it's too big a mandate for one charity to focus on, and perhaps it has to be segregated in this way, but I fear by doing that, we lose the important message that every human life is worth the same. If you know of a website that does include equality for everybody, then please let me know, because I'd love to read about it and find out more about that charity. And that's the end of episode 18. I hope you've learned something about gay rights across the world and same-sex marriage. And to everybody in the UK who's now married, then that's amazing. I'm one of those people, and it feels incredible to do and say. Because like I said, as a child, I didn't think I'd ever get married. And it's only as an adult I can see how preposterous that is. I'm just so glad now the children who are growing up in school are being taught about gay history and gay people because they exist, and are not in a world where they are fearful of never being in a relationship or never being able to be living with somebody or married to somebody, because of course they should be able to. We all should. I'm sorry about my still stuffy nose. Hopefully I'll get some antibiotics and be right as rain next week. As I've told you before, the next episode is all about the internet. I've spent many months researching that episode. Yeah, a lot of time and effort has gone into that. So please, listen to it, and I would love to hear your thoughts and to see if you can help out. But I don't want to say any more now. So until then, I hope you have a great week, and I hope you join me again soon. Take care, and goodbye.